In today's video, I'm going to talk about river management. I'm going to use some examples from China. This is for the IGCSE spec, where you need to know an example of how a river has been managed in either a developing country or an emerging country. So I'm going to talk about this river. This is the Yangtze River. It's in China. We've already talked about it before in terms of the Three Gorges Dam. I'm going to look at both the Three Gorges Dam, but also another example of river management involving that river. So the main reason they needed to manage the Yangtze was to prevent flooding. Here's an example of an extreme flood that's happened on the Yangtze, which has gone halfway up this building. Everywhere around it has been flooded. But they also wanted to have the extra benefit of producing hydroelectric power. So we can see that the Yangtze needed management, because here is an example of a town that's been submerged because of the severe flooding, and this was something that happened regularly. There was like seasonal floods, and so it needed some sort of regulation in terms of river management. So they built the Three Gorges Dam. They started to build this in the early 90s, 94, and essentially it's a hydroelectric power dam, but it's got a huge reservoir, 600 kilometres behind it, which stores a lot of water. So we are being able to manage the discharge going through it and use it as an advantage to make electricity. This was completed in 2006 and it's been operational shortly after that. Just looking at a satellite image, we can see this is the Yangtze before they built the dam, and we can see that the actual width of the river has increased, so there's a greater capacity, especially in this area where the actual dam has been built. So there are other benefits in terms of how the river's been managed. It produces 3% of China's electricity, which basically means that it doesn't rely on fossil fuels. It's starting to make it more sustainable, especially on coal. We can say that it's reduced those terrible seasonal floods that they often get downstream. Those floods still happen, but they're much, much smaller because the dam can hold back water and release it slowly. 2010 was when they had some floods, which they actually were able to reduce the overall impacts. Also, because we're controlling the river a bit better, it's easier for ships to navigate it, where they can therefore improve trade. So there's an economic benefit to it. However, there were some severe problems of building a huge dam like the Three Gorges Dam. To build the reservoir and to flood all that land, they actually had to remove people from the area. So hundreds of towns were destroyed, as we can see on the left here, but also others were flooded, and nearly 1 million people had to be moved out of that area. Since the dam's been built, there's been problems with sediment actually accumulating behind the dam. Well, that sediment before would have gone somewhere, and that would have gone downstream, and that would have been deposited on both sides of the riverbank, and therefore we can say that some of the farming lands that are beyond the dam actually are less fertile, because they're not getting that lovely alluvium being put onto it, and therefore that's slightly problematic. We can also say that building up a sediment over time also reduces the capacity of the reservoir. So that reservoir is there to be able to hold water and release it slowly, but if we have more sediment in it, that means that actual reservoir is actually getting smaller, so it can hold less water. The dam was also built in a very seismically active area, and there are concerns that because there's movement in the earth in terms of earthquakes and it's on a fault line, that if there are earthquakes in the future, the dam will actually be damaged, and therefore all of this river management will actually stop. One other large problem is if I build a big blockage in the river and there's stuff in the river, for example industrial waste or domestic waste, then it often gets trapped behind it. So here is actually right behind the Three Gorges Dam, and there's a significant decrease in water quality because of all of that waste that's been trapped behind the river. So that was part one of the equation. There's also another part of river management that happens, and it's actually this long canal. It's called the SouthNorth Water Transport Project. essentially, if we look at China in terms of a major water issue, this red area here is the North China Plain, and it's where most of the population live. It's where most of the economic development is. There's over 200 million people living there. There's a lot of industry, which is very water intensive, and farming, which needs lots of irrigation. So we can say that area has an incredibly high water demand. However, that's not where all the water is actually being precipitated. A lot of it actually happens in the south. And so we can say the area of surplus is where we need to move the water from the south to the north. So the whole idea of the south to north water transport project is to move from an area of surplus, the south, to a north where it's scarce and in high demand. So they've built these huge canals, a combination of canals. I've put on here the dam where the Yangtze River is, and they're actually moving water from the Yangtze and tributaries of the Yangtze. So they built, planned to build three routes. They built the central route, which was, the eastern route, which was opened in 2013. The central route followed shortly behind that in 2014. But because of problems with it, they actually didn't open up the western route. They've stopped building it. And we're going to look at the costs and benefits of these projects by building such a big infrastructure project. So in terms of benefits, we can say there are definite benefits for managing the river in this way. So the economy in the north gets lots of water, and therefore it can be productive and it can boom, especially industry and farming, which gets successfully supplied with lots of water. The north becomes more water secure. We have safe drinking water, which basically means that people are healthier because they're not drinking water from polluted sources. And it is an example of showing, like the Three Gorges Dam, excellence in Chinese engineering, which puts them on a political, impressive recognition. However, with all of these huge infrastructure projects, there are costs as well. If we move water from the south to the north, it could be that the south now starts to experience shortages because we're taking too much water away. Like the Three Gorges Dam, we've had to move people out of the way to build these transport canals. So we're displacing people from their home towns. Equally, we're disrupting the environment. Wildlife and ecosystems have been damaged because of building these huge canals. Similarly, if I put lots of water on the surface in an area of China where there is high temperatures, lots of that water actually gets evaporated, and therefore water that could be used is actually going into the clouds, and therefore we don't know where that water might end up. It's not going where we want it to. The last thing is that it's very expensive, and the taxpayers have to burden this, even though it might not affect or help everyone. So this is a good example of a river management project where there are both pros and cons to managing the river.